Dr. Zefkara stared at the data pad with red eyes that had seen 300 years of galactic service. The Veltharian psychologist had studied 47 different species during that time and knew exactly what to expect from each new assignment: fear first, then confusion, followed by slow acceptance of their place in the greater galactic community. It was always the same pattern, written in the stars as clearly as the laws of physics. But this assignment felt different even before it began. The species was called human, and they lived on a blue planet they named Earth. The preliminary reports made Zefkara's tentacles twitch with confusion. These humans had achieved faster-than-light travel in just 53 years. After discovering atomic energy, most species took at least 2 centuries to make that leap. The Veltharians themselves had needed for 100 years. Even stranger was how they had responded to first contact. When Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Horizon encountered the Galactic Patrol ship Eternal Dawn, he did not follow any known protocol. He did not bow or show submission. He did not request mercy or protection. Instead, he had demanded to speak with whoever was in charge and insisted that humans deserved equal treatment in whatever government controlled this part of space. The patrol ship captain, a seasoned Krellian named Vorth, had been so shocked that he forgot to follow standard procedures. No newly contacted species had ever made demands. They usually cowered or fainted or tried to hide. But Captain Morrison had crossed his arms, smiled that strange human expression, and waited for an answer. Now Zefkara floated in the observation deck of the research station Mindbridge, which orbited Earth at a safe distance. The station was equipped with the most advanced psychological analysis equipment in the galaxy. Scanners that could read brainwave patterns from orbit, behavioral prediction algorithms tested on thousands of species, and cultural analysis programs that had never failed to categorize a civilization within 3 standard months. Zefkara began the standard protocol by reviewing the basic information about humans. They were bipedal mammals with short lifespans of less than 100 years. They required oxygen and water like most carbon-based life forms. They lived in groups, but showed unusual variation in their social structures. Some formed large governments, while others preferred small communities. Some followed strict rules, while others seemed to make up new rules constantly. This variation was the first warning sign. Most species developed one primary social structure that worked for their psychology. The Veltharians had their pod collectives. The Krellians had their honor hierarchies. The Zephyrians had their meditation communes. Each species found one way that matched their nature and stuck with it for millennia. But humans seemed to try everything at once. Zefkara activated the deep-skin psychological profilers and began observing human settlements. The scanners focused on a large human city called New Geneva, where approximately 2 million humans lived and worked together. The psychologist expected to find the usual patterns of a primitive society struggling with basic cooperation and resource distribution. Instead, the scanners revealed something impossible. In the Northern District, Dr. Lisa Carter worked 18 hours a day in a laboratory, developing new medicines using alien technology that the humans had somehow acquired. Through trade agreements, she shared her research freely with other scientists around the planet, refusing to keep secrets that might help people. The behavioral algorithms marked this as standard altruistic cooperation, which was normal enough. But in the same city, General Ryan Tucker was using similar alien technology to design new weapon systems. He worked just as hard as Dr. Carter and showed the same dedication to his species. He also believed he was protecting people and serving the greater good. The algorithms flagged this as typical defensive preparation, also normal. The contradiction made no sense. Both humans were using the same resources for completely opposite purposes. Yet both believed they were helping their species survive. In every other civilization, such conflicts would create immediate civil war or at least permanent division into separate societies. But the humans in New Geneva seemed to accept both approaches as necessary parts of their community. Zefkara decided to conduct direct interviews with human subjects. The station's transportation beam brought 3 volunteers aboard: Marine Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, businessman Steve Hamilton, and a young engineer named Carlos Martinez. All three had agreed to help with the research. In exchange for learning more about galactic civilization, the interviews revealed even more contradictions. Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated absolute loyalty to her military unit and claimed she would die for soldiers she had never met from countries she had never visited. But she also stated clearly that she would refuse any order that violated what she called her moral code, even if it meant punishment or death. Steve Hamilton showed genuine concern for the welfare of complete strangers and had donated large amounts of money to help people in distant parts of his planet. Yet during their conversation, he described business negotiations where he had deliberately sought advantages that would cost his partners profits. He saw no conflict between these behaviors. Carlos Martinez proved most puzzling of all. The young human spent his free time climbing dangerous rock formations purely for what he called fun, despite the obvious risk of death or injury. When Zef Kara asked why he would deliberately endanger himself for no survival benefit, Carlos simply smiled and said it made him feel alive. That by the end of the first month, Zef Kara had filled 17 data storage units with observations that made no sense according to any known psychological model. The humans seemed to be living contradictions who should have destroyed themselves long ago. Yet they had not only survived but thrived enough to reach the stars. The psychologist began to suspect that everything the galaxy knew about psychology was about to change. 3 months into the study, Zef Kara had documented behaviors that challenged every psychological principle. In the galactic database, the Valtharian psychologist had observed over 3,000 individual humans and found that two followed exactly the same behavioral pattern. This should have been impossible for a successful species. The morning observation session focused on human responses to conflict resolution. In the city of New Geneva, a dispute had arisen between factory workers and management over working conditions. Every galactic species had predictable ways of handling such conflicts. The Krellians would fight until the strongest side won. The Zephyrians would meditate until reaching consensus. The Thornbacks would simply follow whatever their eldest decided. But humans did something completely different. They formed what they called committees with representatives from both sides. These committees argued loudly and passionately, sometimes for hours, until they reached agreements that satisfied nobody completely, but gave everyone something they wanted. Zef Kara watched in fascination as both sides walked away from negotiations feeling frustrated, yet somehow pleased with the outcome. Even stranger was how they treated their representatives during these negotiations. Factory worker Jake Sullivan criticized his own representative when he felt the man was not fighting hard enough for workers' rights. At the same time, Sullivan defended the same representative when management accused him of being unreasonable. This dual behavior of criticism and support toward the same person defied all logical analysis. The afternoon brought another puzzle when Zef Kara observed human family structures. Dr. Patricia Wong lived with her elderly parents, caring for them despite the fact that they could no longer contribute to society's productivity. She spent significant resources on their medical care and comfort, resources that could have been used to advance her own research career. When questioned about this choice, she seemed confused that anyone would consider it a choice at all. Yet, in the same neighborhood, college student Danny Cooper openly disagreed with his parents about his future career, refusing to follow the family tradition of becoming a doctor. Because he preferred studying art, his parents supported his decision, even though they clearly disapproved of it. This combination of disagreement and support created a family dynamic that no galactic psychology textbook had ever described. Zef Kara decided to examine human responses to authority figures, to understand their social hierarchy. The results were more confusing than ever. Police officer Rita Santos enforced laws created by her government, showing clear respect for the authority structure, but she also participated in protests against some of those same laws. During her free time, demanding changes to the very system she served professionally. When asked about this apparent contradiction, Officer Santos explained that she served the law because she believed in order and safety, but she protested certain laws because she believed they were wrong. She saw no conflict between serving a system and working to change it. This concept of simultaneous loyalty and dissent was completely unknown among other galactic species. The most disturbing observations came when Zefkara studied human children. In every known species, young ones learned their proper place in society and gradually accepted adult responsibilities. Human children did learn from their elders, but they also questioned everything they were taught. 10-year-old Kevin Miller asked his teacher why the sky was blue, why people had different skin colors, why some countries were rich while others were poor, and why adults made rules that sometimes seemed unfair instead of being punished for questioning authority. Kevin was praised for his curiosity. His teacher, Mrs. Helen Brooks, encouraged him to keep asking questions and to think for himself. She taught him facts and rules, but also taught him to examine whether those facts and rules made sense. This approach to education should have created chaos and rebellion, but instead it seemed to produce adults who were both cooperative and independent. Zefkara observed human art and entertainment, hoping to find clearer patterns in their cultural expressions. Human creative works showed the same contradictions as their daily behavior. They created stories about heroes who broke rules to do the right thing, villains who followed orders without question, and complex characters who were both good and bad at the same time. One popular human story followed a character named Robin Hood who stole money from wealthy people and gave it to poor people. Humans admired this character even though he was technically a criminal. They seemed to understand that sometimes breaking laws could be more moral than following them. This concept of situational ethics was completely alien to most galactic civilizations, which relied on absolute moral codes. The research team expanded to include specialists from other worlds, hoping their different perspectives might explain human behavior. Dr. Mothtar, a crystalline behavioral analyst, attempted to map human decision-making processes using quantum probability matrices. The results broke 3 analysis computers and drove Dr. Mothtar into a meditation cycle that lasted 2 weeks. Environmental scientist Dr. Kate Wilson became a particular focus of study when she discovered pollution problems caused by her own government space program. Instead of staying quiet to protect her career, she published her findings and testified before government committees about the dangers her actions potentially damaged her planet's space development efforts. Yet other humans praised her for putting long-term planetary health above short-term progress. This behavior was completely irrational by galactic standards. Species succeeded by working together toward common goals, not by having individuals sabotage collective efforts, even for supposedly noble reasons. Yet human society seemed to benefit from having people like Dr. Wilson, who challenged their own institutions. Zefkara interviewed businessman Marcus Taylor, who had made enormous profits selling medical supplies during a recent disaster. Other humans criticized him for profiting from tragedy, yet his quick response had saved lives by getting needed supplies to victims faster than any government agency could manage. He was simultaneously viewed as greedy and heroic, often by the same people. The psychologist realized that humans seemed to evaluate actions based on multiple criteria at once, rather than following single moral principles. They could praise someone's results while criticizing their motives, or support someone's goals while disagreeing with their methods. This complex moral reasoning required a level of cognitive flexibility that no other known species possessed. As the 3rd month of study concluded, Zefkara faced an uncomfortable truth. The human psychological profile did not fit into any existing category. They were not a hive mind like the Zephyrians, not an honor culture like the Krellians, not a logic-based society like the crystallines. They were something entirely new, a species that seemed to thrive on internal contradiction and constant change. The implications terrified the galactic psychological community, because if humans could succeed with such chaotic psychology, it meant that everything they thought they knew about successful civilizations might be wrong. Zefkara prepared the most important report of a 300-year career. The preliminary findings about humans would be presented to the full Galactic Council in 7 standard days, and the psychologist knew that the conclusions would shock the assembled representatives. from 47 worlds. The report began with a simple statement that would change everything. Humans were a psychological impossibility that somehow existed. Anyway, every known principle of species psychology said that humans should have destroyed themselves within a few generations of developing complex society. Their internal contradictions were too great, their individual variations too extreme, their decision-making processes too chaotic. Yet they had not only survived, but had reached the stars, faster than almost any other species in galactic history. The council session took place on Nexus Prime, the ancient capital world that had hosted interspecies meetings for over 2,000 years. Representatives from dozens of civilizations filled the great chamber, their various forms of life creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. At the center sat High Chancellor Vexithan, a dignified ethereal whose people had first established the council eons ago. Zefkara activated the holographic display and began presenting evidence that challenged 40 centuries of psychological science. The first images showed human cities where millions of individuals lived in close proximity, despite holding completely different beliefs about how society should function. In New Geneva alone, the scans had identified over 300 distinct political philosophies, 57 different religious systems, and countless personal moral codes that often contradicted each other. Chancellor Vexithan's energy field flickered with confusion. How do they maintain order? He asked in the harmonic tones of his species. They do not maintain order in any way we understand, Zefkara replied. They maintain what they call organized chaos. They have laws that everyone agrees to follow, but they also have systems for changing those laws constantly. They have leaders, but those leaders must regularly prove they still deserve to lead by winning competitions called elections. The Krellian representative, General Thokmer, slammed his armored fist on the speaking podium. This is impossible. No species can function without clear hierarchy and absolute leadership. How do they make decisions during crises? Zefkara showed recordings of human responses to natural disasters. When earthquakes struck the city of San Angeles, humans had responded in ways that defied all prediction models. Instead of waiting for orders from central authority, individuals and small groups had immediately begun rescue operations. Dr. Frank Miller, a local physician, had set up emergency medical stations without any official authorization. Construction worker Carlos Martinez had organized volunteer teams to search collapsed buildings. Teacher Mary Foster had established temporary shelters for displaced families. They created order spontaneously from chaos, Zefkara explained. No central planning, no hierarchical command structure, just individuals deciding what needed to be done and doing it. The official government response came later and mostly involved coordinating what citizens had already begun. Dr. Sothara, the Zephyrian meditation master, floated higher in her containment field. This suggests a level of individual initiative that should create constant conflict. How do they resolve disputes when every person believes they know the correct course of action? The display showed footage of human debate chambers, courtrooms, and informal discussions. Humans argued constantly about everything, from the best way to grow food to the meaning of existence itself. But their arguments followed strange patterns that no other species used. They would fight passionately for their positions while simultaneously acknowledging that their opponents might be partially correct. They would change their own minds when presented with convincing evidence, something most species considered a sign of weakness. Zefkara played audio of a conversation between Dr. Patricia Wong and her colleague Dr. Lisa Carter about the best approach to treating a new disease. Both scientists held strong opinions and defended them vigorously. But when Dr. Carter presented research that contradicted Dr. Wong's theory, Dr. Wong had immediately abandoned her original position and adopted Dr. Carter's approach. She had thanked Dr. Carter for correcting her mistake, rather than feeling embarrassed about being wrong. They treat being wrong as an opportunity to learn rather than as a failure, Zefkara noted. This allows them to adapt their thinking quickly when circumstances change. The presentation continued with examples of human moral reasoning that baffled the assembled representatives. When businessman Steve Hamilton had discovered that his company was accidentally overcharging customers due to a computer error. He had voluntarily refunded the excess payments even though the customers had not noticed the problem. This cost his company significant profits, but Hamilton had said it was the right thing to do. Yet the same Steve Hamilton negotiated aggressively in other business deals, seeking every possible advantage for his company. He could be both selflessly honest and ruthlessly competitive depending on the situation. The situational ethics system was completely foreign to species that operated under fixed moral codes. The most disturbing evidence came from observations of human children. Young human Kevin Miller had been caught taking food from the school cafeteria without permission, a clear violation of rules. But investigation revealed that Kevin had been giving the food to a classmate whose family could not afford lunch. When school officials discovered this, they did not punish Kevin for stealing. Instead, they changed the school's food program to ensure that all children received adequate meals. They break their own rules when the rules produce outcomes they consider wrong, Zefkara explained. Then they changed the rules rather than punishing the rule breaker. This suggests a level of moral flexibility that should create total chaos. Yet their societies remain remarkably stable. The council chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. If humans could succeed with such contradictory psychology, it meant that the careful order of galactic civilization might not be the only way to build a successful society. It meant that chaos and change might be strengths rather than weaknesses. The Galactic Council had spent millennia creating stable, predictable civilizations by helping each species find their proper psychological niche and stick to it. The Krellians had their honor codes, the Zephyrians had their meditation practices, the Crystallines had their logic systems. Each species had one way of thinking that worked for them, and they had been encouraged to never deviate from it. But humans seemed to thrive on deviation itself. Chancellor Vexithan's energy field dimmed with concern. Dr. Zefkara, what do you recommend as our course of action regarding this species? Zefkara had dreaded this question, because the answer would determine humanity's future in the galaxy. Standard protocol called for psychological containment of species that showed destabilizing traits. Humans would be quietly restricted to their home system until they developed more predictable behavior patterns, which usually took several centuries. But something in the data suggested that containing humans might be impossible and potentially dangerous. They had reached the stars in record time precisely because of their unpredictable psychology, not despite it. Their ability to think in contradictions and change their minds quickly had allowed them to solve problems that would have stumped more rigid species. I require additional time to study their long-term behavioral patterns, Zefkara finally answered. The preliminary data suggests that standard containment protocols may not be appropriate for this species. The Council agreed to extend the study, unaware that this decision would ultimately transform their understanding of intelligence itself. The Galactic Council's decision to extend the human study came with new authority to conduct controlled behavioral tests. Zefkara had never been granted such broad research permissions before, but the Council's growing concern about human unpredictability had overcome their usual cautious approach to species contact. The first test was designed to measure human responses to resource scarcity, a fundamental stressor that revealed the core psychology of any species. Zefkara selected a small human colony on the planet's northern continent, where 500 humans had established a mining operation. Using advanced atmospheric manipulation technology, the research team created conditions that would reduce the colony's food production by 60% over the next 3 months. Every known species responded to scarcity in predictable ways. The Krellians became aggressively competitive, with the strongest individuals claiming the largest shares of remaining resources. The Zephyrians entered collective meditation to achieve peaceful acceptance of reduced circumstances. The Thornbacks immediately submitted to their eldest members, who distributed resources according to strict hierarchy. But the humans did something unprecedented. Colony Administrator Helen Brooks called a meeting within hours of the first crop failures. Instead of hoarding resources or establishing rationing based on importance to the colony, she organized committees to study the problem and develop solutions. Agricultural specialist Danny Cooper began experimenting with new growing techniques. Using alien plant varieties, engineer Amy Rodriguez designed water recycling systems that could extend their existing supplies. Most remarkably, the humans began sharing resources more freely rather than competing for them. Families with larger food stores invited neighbors to share meals. Individuals with useful skills volunteered their time to help solve the crisis. Rather than demanding payment, Dr. Lisa Carter, the colony's only trained physician, began working 18-hour days caring for people showing signs of malnutrition, refusing any special food rations for herself. Zefkara observed this behavior with growing amazement. The humans were not just avoiding the conflict that scarcity typically created among other species, they were actively strengthening their community bonds under stress. The crisis had made them more cooperative rather than more competitive. The second test introduced external threats to measure human defensive psychology. The research team used holographic projection technology to make it appear that hostile alien ships were approaching the colony. Standard species responses were either immediate submission to superior force or desperate attempts to hide until the danger passed. The humans under Commander Alex Stone responded by doing neither. They immediately began analyzing the approaching ships to understand their capabilities and potential weaknesses. Stone organized the colonists into teams that used their industrial equipment to create improvised weapons and defensive positions. But they also sent diplomatic messages to the approaching ships, attempting to establish communication and negotiate peaceful resolution. Most surprising was how they turned their apparent disadvantage into tactical benefits. The mining equipment became the foundation for defensive fortifications. The agricultural knowledge that Dr. Patricia Wong had developed became the basis for creating camouflaged observation posts. Even their chaotic decision-making process became an asset, as multiple teams developed different defensive strategies simultaneously, making their overall response unpredictable to attackers. When Zefkara revealed that the threat was only a test, the humans showed another unique reaction. Instead of anger at being deceived or relief that the danger was false, they expressed curiosity about the test's purpose and asked detailed questions about the technology used to create the illusion. Commander Stone actually requested copies of the defensive plans they had developed, saying they might be useful for future genuine emergencies. The third test proved most revealing of all. Zefkara designed scenarios that forced humans to choose between individual benefit and group welfare, the classic moral dilemma that had defined civilizations throughout galactic history. The psychologist presented colony members with situations where helping others required genuine personal sacrifice. Teacher Mary Foster was told that volunteering to help with dangerous mining operations would likely result in injury that could end her career, but would also help the colony meet crucial mineral extraction quotas. Without hesitation, she volunteered for the most hazardous assignments and spent her free time training other colonists in safety procedures, reducing everyone's risk while increasing her own. Businessman Marcus Taylor was offered exclusive trading rights that would make him wealthy, but would also prevent other colonists from accessing certain resources. He negotiated a deal that gave him smaller profits, but ensured that everyone in the colony could participate in the trading network. When asked why he had reduced his own benefits, he seemed confused by the question. The most startling discovery came when the humans learned they were being studied. Dr. Zefkara had planned to keep the research secret until its completion, but a technical malfunction in the observation equipment revealed the monitoring station's presence to human sensors. The psychologist expected anger, fear, or demands that the observations cease immediately. Instead, the humans became intensely curious about their observers. Dr. Frank Miller, a human psychologist working in the colony, sent a formal message to the research station requesting a meeting. His message was polite but direct, expressing genuine interest in learning about alien psychology and offering to share human research methods in return. He suggested that both species might learn valuable information through cooperation rather than one-sided observation. This response was so unprecedented that Zefkara consulted with the research team for 3 days before deciding how to respond. No species had ever requested to participate in their own psychological evaluation. Most reacted with fear, anger, or attempts to manipulate the results once they discovered they were being studied. The decision to meet with Dr. Miller proved more revealing than months of secret observation had been. The human psychologist arrived at the research station with notebooks full of questions about Valtharian psychology, crystalline logic systems, and Zephyrian meditation techniques. He treated the meeting as an academic conference rather than an interrogation or confrontation. Dr. Miller explained that humans had been wondering about the psychology of other intelligent species since they first realized they might not be alone in the universe. He showed Zefkara human theories about how different environments might produce different types of consciousness and how various species might solve the universal problems of cooperation, communication, and survival. What shocked Zefkara most was that many human theories were remarkably accurate. Without any direct contact with galactic civilization, human psychologists had predicted the existence of hive mind species, logic-based civilizations, and honor culture societies. Their theoretical models had gaps and errors, but they demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how psychology might vary across species. Dr. Miller's final request stunned the entire research team. He asked if humans could help with the study of their own species, pointing out that they might notice behavioral patterns that external observers would miss. He offered to establish a joint research program where human and alien psychologists worked together to understand the psychological principles that govern both species. For the first time in 300 years of studying primitive civilizations, Zefkara was being offered partnership instead of being forced to conduct research in secret. The implications were staggering. If humans could contribute meaningfully to the study of their own psychology, it suggested a level of self-awareness that no other species had demonstrated. The research had begun with the goal of understanding human psychology well enough to predict and control human behavior. Instead, Zefkara was discovering that humans understood psychology well enough to study themselves, and they were offering to share that knowledge with the galaxy. The joint research program with Dr. Frank Miller had been active for 2 months. When the emergency communication from the Galactic Council arrived, Zefkara read the message with growing alarm as the Council ordered immediate implementation of containment protocols for the human species. The decision had been made without consulting the research team, based on reports from other sectors where human exploration ships had been making contact with additional galactic civilizations. The problem was not that humans were hostile or aggressive. The problem was exactly the opposite. Everywhere humans encountered other species, they began asking questions that no one had asked before, suggesting changes that no one had considered necessary, and demonstrating possibilities that challenged established galactic order. On Keth Prime, human ambassador Julius Santos had convinced the Krellian leadership to establish their first advisory council, allowing lower-ranked individuals to contribute ideas about governance. The Krellian hierarchy had remained unchanged for 3,000 years, but within 6 months of human contact, they were experimenting with concepts like shared decision-making and merit-based advancement. On the Zephyrian meditation worlds, human visitors had begun participating in collective consciousness sessions and had somehow introduced elements of individual creativity into the group mind. The Zephyrians reported experiencing what they called new thoughts, ideas that none of them had generated individually, but that emerged from human-influenced group meditations. The Crystalline Collective had quarantined all human visitors after discovering that exposure to human psychology was causing logic-based individuals to develop what they termed emotional reasoning. Several crystallines had begun making decisions based on intuitive feelings rather than pure calculation, a development that their society considered a dangerous mental disorder. Most disturbing to the Council was that these changes seemed to be spreading. Species that had contact with humans began exhibiting increased psychological flexibility, questioning traditional approaches, and experimenting with new forms of social organization. The careful stability that the Council had maintained for millennia was beginning to fragment under human influence. Zefkara faced the most difficult decision of a long career. Following orders meant recommending that humanity be restricted to their home system through a combination of economic isolation and defensive cordons. Trade would be limited, exploration would be blocked, and human influence on galactic civilization would be contained until they developed more predictable behavior patterns. But the research data suggested that such containment might be impossible and potentially catastrophic. Humans had reached interstellar capability faster than any other known species precisely because of their psychological flexibility. Attempting to restrict them would likely trigger the same innovative responses that had allowed them to solve seemingly impossible technical challenges. The psychologist decided to conduct one final assessment of human responses to learning about potential galactic containment. Dr. Miller was informed about the Council's concerns and asked to predict how humanity would react to being isolated from the broader galactic community. Dr. Miller's response was both reassuring and terrifying. He explained that humans had been isolated for their entire history until recently, so returning to isolation would not be as traumatic for them as it might be for other species. They would be disappointed but not devastated by losing contact with galactic civilization. However, Dr. Miller warned, humans would not simply accept isolation passively. They would study the reasons for their containment and work systematically to address whatever concerns had caused it. If the galaxy feared human psychological influence, humans would develop ways to interact safely with other species without causing unwanted changes. If the galaxy viewed human unpredictability as dangerous, humans would find ways to become more predictable without losing their adaptive capabilities. The most unsettling part of Dr. Miller's prediction was his certainty that humans would eventually succeed in whatever they attempted. He showed Zefkara historical examples of how humans had overcome seemingly impossible challenges through persistent experimentation and collaborative problem solving. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters by adapting faster than problems could overwhelm them. Containment might delay human integration into galactic society, Dr. Miller concluded, but it will not prevent it. Humans will keep trying new approaches until they find one that works. The question is whether the galaxy wants to be part of that process or wants to be surprised by the result. Zefkara realized that Dr. Miller was describing something unprecedented. In galactic history, most species accepted their circumstances and worked within existing limitations. Humans seemed to view limitations as temporary problems to be solved, rather than permanent features of reality. The psychologist began observing human responses to various forms of restriction and limitation. Environmental scientist Dr. Kate Wilson had been told that certain research areas were off-limits due to safety concerns. Instead of accepting these restrictions, she had developed new research methods that made the dangerous areas safe to study. She had turned the limitations into innovation opportunities. Colony engineer Amy Rodriguez had been given insufficient resources to complete a critical infrastructure project. Rather than reporting that the project was impossible, she had redesigned the entire system to work with available materials, creating a more efficient solution than the original plan would have provided. Most remarkably, humans seemed to treat opposition and constraints as useful information rather than as obstacles. When businessman Marcus Taylor had been prevented from accessing certain markets due to trade regulations, he had studied the regulations to understand their purpose and had then developed new business models that achieved his goals while actually strengthening the regulatory framework. This pattern of turning restrictions into improvements appeared throughout human society. They treated problems as puzzles to be solved rather than hardships to be endured. They viewed criticism as feedback for improvement rather than attacks to be resisted. They considered failure as education rather than defeat. Zefkara began to understand that containment would not neutralize the human influence on galactic civilization. It would simply channel that influence in different directions. Isolated humans would spend their time developing better ways to interact with other species, creating technologies and social systems that the galaxy had never seen before, and preparing for eventual reintegration with even greater capabilities than they currently possessed. The psychologist realized that the galaxy faced a choice that had never been confronted before. They could welcome human psychological flexibility and accept the changes it would bring to established civilizations, or they could resist human influence and face eventual confrontation with a species that had spent centuries developing ways to overcome galactic opposition. As Zefkara prepared the final report that would determine humanity's future, the weight of choosing correctly for both humans and the galaxy created the most intense pressure the psychologist had ever experienced. The decision would affect not just one species, but the entire structure of galactic civilization, and there were no previous examples to guide the choice. The final council session that would determine humanity's fate took place in the ancient Chamber of Decisions on Nexus Prime. Representatives from 47 civilizations gathered to hear Zefkara's recommendation about whether humans should be granted full galactic citizenship or subjected to containment protocols that would restrict them to their home system for the next several centuries. Zefkara had spent sleepless cycles preparing for this moment, knowing that the decision would affect not only humanity, but the entire future of galactic civilization. The evidence was overwhelming and contradictory, just like the species it described. Humans were simultaneously the most cooperative and most individualistic species ever encountered. They were both the most peaceful and most innovative, the most logical and most emotional, the most predictable and most surprising. High Chancellor Vexithan called the session to order as holographic displays showed the assembled representatives from across the galaxy. Each species had built successful civilizations by finding psychological stability and maintaining it for millennia. The Krellians had their honor codes. The Zephyrians had their collective consciousness. The Crystallines had their logic systems. Each had found one way of thinking that worked and had never deviated from it. But humans seemed to use every possible way of thinking simultaneously. Zefkara began the presentation with the most startling discovery of the entire study. The research had revealed that humans were not just psychologically flexible, they were actively working to become more flexible. Unlike other species that sought psychological stability, humans deliberately sought psychological growth and change. Dr. Kate Wilson provided the clearest example of this unprecedented behavior. She had volunteered to participate in expanded psychological testing and had spent months learning about Zephyrian meditation techniques, Krellian honor concepts, and crystalline logical analysis. Instead of adopting one of these approaches, she had integrated elements from all of them into her own decision-making process, creating a hybrid psychological system that was uniquely her own. Even more remarkable was what had happened to the research team itself during the extended study. Dr. Mothtar, the crystalline analyst who had initially been confused by human behavior, had begun incorporating intuitive reasoning into logical analysis. The Zephyrian observer, Dr. Silthara, reported experiencing individual thoughts that emerged from her meditation sessions. Even Zefkara had noticed changes in personal thought patterns, becoming more willing to question established psychological principles. The humans are not just adaptable, Zefkara explained to the stunned council. They appear to catalyze adaptability in other species through simple contact and interaction. General Thokmer, the Krellian representative, demanded immediate containment. If humans can alter the psychology of other species, they represent a fundamental threat to galactic stability. Our civilizations have maintained successful social structures for thousands of years. We cannot risk contamination by unpredictable influences. But Dr. Silthara, speaking for the Zephyrian collective, offered a different perspective. Our meditation sessions have become more creative and productive since human contact. We are generating solutions to problems that have puzzled us for centuries. Perhaps what we call contamination could be considered enhancement. The debate continued for hours as representatives argued about whether human psychological influence was beneficial or dangerous. Species that had experienced direct human contact reported both positive changes and concerning disruptions to traditional social patterns. The council faced an unprecedented decision about whether to embrace change or preserve stability. Zefkara presented the final piece of evidence that would tip the decision. During the last month of study, humans had learned about the council's concerns regarding their psychological influence on other species. Instead of becoming defensive or apologetic, they had responded with typical human problem-solving behavior. Dr. Frank Miller had assembled a team of human psychologists, philosophers, and social scientists to study the interaction between human psychology and other galactic species. Their research had produced proposals for what they called graduated cultural exchange programs, designed to minimize psychological disruption while maximizing beneficial learning opportunities. The human proposal suggested establishing controlled interaction environments where interested individuals from other species could safely experience human psychological approaches without being overwhelmed by them. They had even developed screening processes to identify individuals who might benefit from exposure to psychological flexibility and others who might be harmed by it. Most importantly, the humans had offered to restrict their own expansion and cultural influence until the galaxy developed protocols for managing interspecies psychological interaction. They were willing to limit themselves voluntarily to address galactic concerns, while working cooperatively to develop better solutions for long-term integration. This offer stunned the Council because no species had ever voluntarily restricted their own expansion for the benefit of others. The gesture demonstrated the same cooperative psychology that made humans both valuable and potentially dangerous as galactic citizens. Chancellor Vexithan called for the historic vote that would determine whether humanity would join the galactic community as equals or be contained until they developed more predictable behavior patterns. The decision was closer than anyone had expected, with 17 civilizations supporting containment and 15 supporting full integration. The remaining 15 civilizations requested additional information before voting, leading to an unprecedented Council decision to establish a trial integration program. Humans would be granted provisional citizenship with full rights and responsibilities, but their expansion and cultural influence would be carefully monitored and regulated through cooperative agreements rather than imposed restrictions. Most significantly, the Council established the first Department of Interspecies Psychological Development, with Zeth Kara appointed as its director and Dr. Frank Miller as the first human co-director. Their mission would be to study how different species could safely share psychological approaches and learn from each other without losing their essential cultural identities. The trial program proved more successful than anyone had predicted. Within 2 years, voluntary exchange programs had spread throughout the galaxy as species discovered that controlled exposure to different psychological approaches could enhance their problem-solving capabilities without undermining their core social structures. The Krellians developed honor-based scientific research methods that accelerated their technological development. The Zephyrians learned to use individual creativity to enhance collective meditation sessions. The Crystallines discovered that emotional reasoning could improve logical analysis. When applied appropriately, humans, meanwhile, learned valuable psychological techniques from other species that helped them channel their natural adaptability more effectively. They developed better methods for resolving internal contradictions and making collective decisions without losing individual creativity. 5 years after the initial study began, Zeth Kara published the report that revolutionized galactic psychology. The research had proven that psychological flexibility was not a weakness or abnormality, but an advanced form of intelligence that could be cultivated and shared among different species. The report concluded that humans had not discovered something new but had rediscovered something that all intelligent species possessed, but had forgotten how to use. The capacity for psychological growth and adaptation was apparently a universal trait of consciousness itself, but most civilizations had traded this flexibility for the security of stable social structures. Humans had somehow maintained their psychological flexibility while still building successful civilizations, and they were willing to share this knowledge with the rest of the galaxy. The final paragraph of Zeth Kara's report captured the transformation that human contact had brought to galactic civilization. The study of humans has revealed that the greatest strength of any species is not what they know, but their willingness to continue learning and growing. In teaching us this lesson, humanity has given the galaxy a gift more valuable than any technology or resource. They have shown us that we can all become more than we believed possible.